Let me tell you something, from the depths of life's silent battles. Some of the hardest wounds don't bleed. They bruise the soul. You can walk into a room full of people and still feel like you're drowning, not from loneliness, but from the weight of energy that doesn't belong to you. Toxic people. They don't always scream, they whisper doubts. They don't always hurt with fists, they twist your peace with silence. And you start asking yourself, what did I do wrong? When all you ever did was love deeply, care fully, and believe too kindly. But I'm here to tell you, you are not crazy for feeling heavy. You're not weak for wanting peace. You're not bitter for pulling away from people who drain the light out of you. You're wise. You're growing. And sometimes, growth feels like standing alone in the storm with your soul screaming for silence. See, the smartest way to deal with toxic people? It's not about fighting them, fixing them, or even proving them wrong. It's about finally choosing yourself, without apology, without explanation. It's about taking back the pen and rewriting the chapter they tried to author for you. Now listen closely, because I'm going to give you 5 keys to protect your soul and walk in power. When you're dealing with toxic people, the most difficult part is untangling your emotions from their chaos. You might feel guilty for walking away or even for setting boundaries. That's because your heart was in it. You showed up with honesty, with care, with patience. And when someone twists that, it doesn't just break trust, it confuses the soul. But here's what most people don't understand: detaching emotionally is not a cold act. It's not cruelty, it's wisdom. It's choosing not to let someone else's emotional instability govern your peace. It's stepping away from the roller coaster and standing on solid ground again. You can still care for someone and not carry their burden. You can wish them healing and still protect your own. Some people will pull you into their suffering and label your refusal as selfishness, but you've got to remember, empathy isn't servitude. You don't have to bleed just because someone else refuses to heal. Loving someone does not require you to lose yourself in the process. Real love, whether for a friend, a partner, or a family member, doesn't demand you sacrifice your sanity. It respects the line where their pain ends and your peace begins. It's a skill to sit across from someone who hurt you and not let your spirit shake. It takes strength to hear their voice and not let your past echo through your present. Emotional detachment doesn't mean you don't feel. It means you no longer give them the authority to dictate how you feel. You take your power back when you say, I feel that, but I don't have to respond to it anymore. That's not numbness. That's emotional maturity. It's grace without access. Mercy without invitation. The most compassionate thing you can do sometimes is leave people with themselves. Not out of bitterness, but out of understanding that you cannot grow someone who refuses to plant new roots. You can sit beside them for years, hoping they'll see what you see, hoping they'll treat you differently. But people don't change just because you love them. They change when they're ready to face themselves. Until then, you're only offering pieces of your light to someone who lives in shadows by choice. You don't have to announce your detachment. You don't have to explain why your messages get shorter, or why your availability shrinks. Let your silence teach what your words never could. Let your peace confuse them. Toxic people thrive on reaction. They feed on your emotional investment. So when you stop investing, when you step out of their drama and start protecting your own narrative, they feel it. Not because you said it loud, but because you no longer play the role they assigned to you. Sometimes, the real act of compassion is choosing to heal in silence. Choosing to say, I'm going to love you from afar. Because I love myself too much to stay near this fire. It's understanding that you can't be both the rescuer and the casualty. You can't save someone from drowning if they're the one pulling you under. And the moment you realize that, you stop arguing, stop defending, stop proving, and you start preserving. You start healing deeply and quietly, in a space where their poison can no longer reach. Detach, not to stop caring, but to stop bleeding. Detach because your heart needs a place to rest, not a battlefield to survive. Detach because your peace is sacred, and anyone who keeps asking you to sacrifice it in the name of love has no idea what love really is. You are not cold for choosing silence. You are not distant for choosing yourself. You are simply done with the version of love that costs you your soul. You can still wish them well. You can still say a quiet prayer for their healing. You can still remember the good and honor what was. But you do not have to stay where your heart keeps breaking. You do not have to continue watering dead roots, hoping for flowers. You can let go with grace. You can step away with dignity, and in doing so, you finally give yourself permission to breathe again. There's something powerful about silence when everything around you is trying to stir noise. Toxic people will do everything in their power to provoke you. Not because they want to understand you, but because they want to unbalance you. They'll twist your words, question your motives, bait you into arguments just to say, "See, you're no better than me." But you are. And you don't have to shout that truth from the rooftops. The truth speaks louder when it's quiet. Let their chaos speak for itself. Let their patterns build their reputation. Let their own actions be the mirror they refuse to look into. It's hard, especially when you're the one who kept peace. The one who stayed quiet while they made noise in every direction. They might lie about you, paint you as the villain, try to destroy your name while you hold your breath, aching to defend yourself. But if you jump into their storm, you lose your clarity. If you react every time they try to pull you in, they win. Not because you're wrong, but because you allowed them to hijack your energy. And your energy is sacred. Your peace is not for sale. Not even for vindication. You don't need to prove anything to anyone who already made up their mind about you. People who want the truth will see it. They'll notice who's always loud, always complaining, always in the middle of conflict. And they'll notice who's consistent, who stays steady, who doesn't throw stones even when they have every reason to. The smartest thing you can do sometimes is nothing. Nothing at all. Just step back. Let time do what time does. Let it peel back the layers of pretense and reveal what you've known in your spirit all along. There's a difference between protecting your reputation and protecting your peace. When your peace matters more, you stop chasing explanations. You stop clarifying yourself to people who weren't listening in the first place. The need to be understood shrinks when you begin to understand yourself, and when that happens you realize they never had power over you. They only had access. And access can be revoked the moment you recognize your worth. The moment you stop reacting, their chaos gets louder. Because now, they're performing alone. They throw the tantrum, but you don't clap. They spread the lies, but you don't respond. They create the narrative, but you don't play a part. That's how you win. That's how you take back the power they tried to manipulate. You let the fire they started consume only them, while you walk away unburned, untouched, and unmoved. Toxic people will always try to trigger you. But a trigger only works when it's connected to a wound. Once you start healing, the trigger loses its grip. You look at the same behavior, the same manipulation, the same cycle, and instead of reacting, you just feel nothing. That nothing is powerful. That nothing is the sound of healing. That nothing is your soul whispering, "I'm done." You don't need revenge when your peace is louder than their drama. You're not being weak by staying silent. You're being wise. You're choosing not to waste your voice in rooms where your truth is only going to be twisted. You're learning that peace is not passive. It's discipline. It's restraint. It's the kind of strength that doesn't always get applause, but always gets results. Because the ones who walk in peace outlast the ones who stir up storms. Every single time, their chaos will eventually collapse under the weight of its own lies. And when it does, you won't have to say a word. You'll be far from it, building, growing, healing, living. And they'll be stuck in the same cycle, trying to find a new audience to blame. Let that be your power. Let their own behavior be their undoing. Let your stillness be the loudest message they never expected to hear. There is a quiet strength in walking away, not in anger, not in vengeance, but in clarity. When you start to understand the damage certain people bring to your life, you begin to see that distance isn't an act of cruelty. It's an act of survival. It's easy to lash out, to cut ties with loud declarations and burned bridges. But that's not healing. Healing is when you create space without hatred. When you separate not to hurt them, but to save yourself. When you say, "I can't keep sacrificing my peace just to stay connected to someone who only brings me pain." Toxic people will try to tell you that pulling away is you being cold. They'll say you're abandoning them, rejecting them, even punishing them. But the truth is, distance is a form of self-respect. It's what happens when you realize that staying close to someone who constantly wounds you is not love, it's self-betrayal. When you stop giving them daily access to your heart, your energy, your mind, that's not revenge. That's you choosing to breathe again. That's you learning how to live without tiptoeing around someone else's instability. Distance doesn't mean you stop caring. It doesn't mean you stop wishing them well. It just means you finally understand that caring for someone and protecting yourself are not the same thing. You can love someone from a distance. You can pray for someone from a distance. You can respect someone's journey without letting their detours destroy your direction. You're not being cold when you set a boundary, you're being wise. Because there comes a time when you stop fighting for connection and start fighting for your soul. When you remove yourself from toxic energy, you begin to hear your own voice again. You begin to think clearly, sleep peacefully, feel emotions that aren't clouded by someone else's manipulation. That distance becomes a sanctuary, a place where you heal, where you reconnect with yourself, where you rebuild what was damaged. It's not isolation, it's restoration. And the people who truly care for you will respect that. They won't guilt trip you for needing space. They won't label your silence as hostility. They'll understand it as a necessary pause to preserve your heart. Sometimes, toxic people are so used to chaos that your calm feels offensive. They're so used to power plays that your quiet boundary feels like punishment. But that's not your burden to carry. You don't have to explain your healing to those who benefited from your brokenness. You don't have to make your peace palatable for people who only understood you when you were hurting. The space you create is not for them. It's for you. It's for your growth, your peace, your clarity. And the longer you honor that space, the more you realize you should have done it sooner. You're not responsible for how others interpret your boundaries. You're responsible for honoring what your spirit is asking for. And sometimes your spirit is asking for space. Space to breathe. Space to think. Space to live without fear of being drained. That space becomes sacred, not because it pushes others away, but because it finally allows you to come home to yourself. It gives you room to hear your thoughts, to make decisions without manipulation, to exist without performance. And that kind of freedom is priceless. The people who truly value you won't be offended by your need for space. They'll see the strength in your stillness. They'll understand that distance isn't always disconnection. It's often the deepest form of self-love. It's the recognition that you can no longer sacrifice your mental and emotional health just to keep the peace. It's knowing that sometimes peace only comes when you walk away. Not out of spite, but out of wisdom. Because some storms aren't meant to be survived. They're meant to be walked away from, early and gracefully. Distance is not about punishing the other person. It's about healing yourself. It's about breaking free from a pattern that only knows how to take. It's about giving yourself permission to grow in an environment that doesn't constantly ask you to shrink. And the moment you understand that, you stop defending your space. You stop explaining your silence. You stop apologizing for stepping back. Because your well-being is not a negotiation, it's a priority. There comes a point where you've repeated yourself so many times that your soul begins to feel exhausted. Not because your voice is weak, but because deep down, you know the truth. They were never listening to understand you. They were listening to twist your words, to turn your honesty into offense, to make you feel like you're too much or not enough. And when you find yourself explaining your heart over and over to someone who's already made up their mind about you, that's not connection. That's slow, quiet self-abandonment disguised as love. You can write them paragraphs, pour out your thoughts in voice notes, break your silence just to bring clarity, and still be met with dismissal. Why? Because some people aren't arguing with you to find peace. They're arguing to keep control. They don't want the truth. They want the upper hand. And as long as you keep offering your worth as an explanation, you keep placing it in the hands of someone who's already decided not to value it. That's not communication. It's erosion. And the longer you stay in that loop, the more your spirit forgets how to stand tall without someone else's permission. You are not a courtroom. You are not on trial. You are not required to keep defending your kindness, your loyalty, your love, to someone who only sees you through the lens of their own wounds. People committed to misunderstanding you will take even your softness and say it's manipulation. They'll look at your silence and call it pride. They'll take your boundaries and label them betrayal. You can't win with them. Not because you're wrong, but because they need you to be wrong to feel right. That's their fuel. That's their shield. Every time you try to explain yourself to someone who isn't hearing you, you lose a piece of your own clarity. You start questioning your worth. You replay conversations at night, wondering what you could have said better, softer, clearer. But love is not supposed to make you second-guess your own intentions. Respect doesn't require constant clarification. Real connection doesn't make you feel like your worth is always on trial. You deserve to be known without having to scream, without having to constantly translate the language of your heart to someone who's not trying to learn it. There is a peace that comes when you stop arguing your value. When you stop showing up to battles you never asked for, just to prove that your love was real. When you stop giving energy to people who've already chosen their perception of you. That peace doesn't mean you don't care anymore. It means you finally care enough about yourself to stop shrinking, to stop doubting, To stop begging to be seen by eyes that only want to find flaws. It's one of the hardest lessons to learn. That some people benefit from not understanding you. If they truly saw your heart, they'd have to confront their own. And that's not something everyone is ready for. So instead, they project. They accuse. They rewrite history. And all you can do is step back. Not because you're defeated, but because you refuse to let your soul be used as a battlefield for someone else's insecurities. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. That's the moment you take your voice back. Not to explain, but to reclaim. You don't need to over-explain why you're kind. Why you're distant. Why you've changed. You've grown. You've learned. You've seen what trying too hard for the wrong people does to your spirit. So now, instead of convincing, you walk. You move different. You stop showing up in spaces where your heart gets dissected like it's a threat. You stop opening up in environments that reward your vulnerability with criticism. And you start honoring yourself in a way you never did before. Not with words, but with action. The most powerful shift happens when you realize your worth is not a debate. It's not something you need to lay out like evidence in hopes that someone finally sees it. The people who are meant for you will know your value without you having to prove it. They'll feel your spirit before you ever explain it. They'll listen with the intent to love, not to judge. Until then, keep your peace, guard your soul, and never again hand your worth to someone who's already made the decision not to see it. There's a silent kind of damage that happens when you stay too long in places that deplete you. Not every wound bleeds. Some of them show up as exhaustion, as apathy, as the shrinking of your light over time. When you're constantly surrounded by people who misunderstand you, undervalue you, or only see you for what you give, your spirit begins to dim quietly. That's why where you place yourself matters. You can water yourself all day, but if the soil is poisoned, your roots will still rot. It's not just about self-care, it's about soul care. And that starts with choosing environments that don't just tolerate you, but rebuild you. You've got to be around voices that remind you of your strength, not your flaws. People who celebrate your depth instead of making you feel like you're too much. Rooms where your silence is respected, not questioned. Conversations that expand your vision instead of constantly triggering your wounds. When you start seeking those environments, you realize how many years you spent trying to grow in places that didn't have sunlight. How many times you gave your best energy to spaces that only drained it. That realization hurts. But it's also the beginning of your healing. Growth doesn't happen in chaos. It happens in stillness, in safety, in spaces that allow you to unfold without fear. When you're always on edge, always bracing for judgment, always adjusting yourself to be more acceptable, you lose the core of who you are. But when you step into the right environment, even if it's just a quiet room, even if it's just your own presence, you start to breathe differently. You feel your shoulders drop, your thoughts slow down, and your heart begins to believe again that healing is possible. You're not asking for too much when you want peace. When you crave connection that's nourishing, not draining. That's not being high maintenance. That's being human. You deserve people who don't make you earn their kindness. You deserve spaces where your healing is honored, not interrupted. And sometimes those spaces won't find you. You have to go create them. You have to walk away from noise to discover clarity. You have to say no to familiarity if it's also harming you. It takes courage, yes. But what you gain on the other side is freedom, deep, lasting, soul-restoring freedom. The right environments won't demand that you stay small. They'll challenge you to grow, but not through fear. Through inspiration, through trust, through consistency. In those spaces, you begin to bloom again. You start seeing yourself not just through survival, but through possibility. The you that was buried beneath survival mode begins to emerge. And with every moment of alignment you rebuild. Not just your energy, but your identity. You become whole again in the presence of safety. Investing in these environments doesn't mean you cut everyone off or isolate yourself. It means you become intentional. You guard your energy like a sacred currency. You recognize when your spirit is whispering, "This doesn't feel like home." And instead of ignoring that voice, you follow it. You chase peace like your life depends on it. Because sometimes it does. It's not selfish to protect your space. It's spiritual. It's emotional maturity. It's the refusal to let your life be defined by environments that were never meant to hold you. And the truth is, healing environments don't always look glamorous. Sometimes they're found in early morning walks, in books that speak to your soul, in quiet nights where no one is demanding anything from you. Sometimes they look like less company but deeper conversations. Fewer parties but more purpose. Less noise but more meaning. When you find these things, don't question them. Don't dismiss them. Hold on. Because those small moments of alignment become the foundation for the life you were always meant to live. You have a responsibility to protect the person you're becoming. That means letting go of what's familiar but harmful. That means choosing wholeness over habit. That means honoring the parts of you that are still learning to trust peace after years of surviving chaos. You deserve spaces that help you rise, not ones that keep you crawling. So start investing in those places, in those people, in that version of yourself who no longer apologizes for choosing peace over pain. Because the life you rebuild in safety will always outshine the one you endured in survival.